Hi everybody, welcome to Anna Reads, and in case you couldn't tell, today is 101 Dalmatians. This is the complete plush set from 1990, was it 6 or 7, when they did the live action remake of 101 Dalmatians. And this little girl is my favorite, her name is Jewel, and I just heard a crash and here comes Luther. So, oh by the way, 4 is the new 5. So, before I go banging on about my Disney Bound and my Dalmatians for the rest of the day, there's Luther. There you are. All right, I've wasted almost a full minute. Let's jump right back into Walt Disney, an American Original by Bob Thomas. And where were we? Not that one. Not that one either. Ah, okay, there's Snow White. We were on Snow White yesterday. There we are. All right, and the darn thing went out and grossed $8 million around the world. Yep. So now we are on Unit 3, Chapter 12. The 2 million drawings that made up Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs had been combined to produce 83 minutes of superlative motion picture entertainment. Critics were unanimously enthusiastic and audiences were enthralled. All attendance records were broken in an unprecedented 3-week run at the Radio City Music Hall. The attraction could have run longer, but the Disney brothers believed it should play the New York neighborhoods while public interest was still high. The 7 Dwarfs, especially Dopey, became immediate folk figures, and the film's songs, particularly Hi-Ho, It's Off to Work We Go, and Whistle While You Work, were heard from every radio. Walt and Roy Disney enjoyed the unique experience of watching money pour into their corporation. Within 6 months after the release of Snow White, they had paid off all their bank loans. The $8 million that the film earned in its first release was a phenomenal sum, considering that the average price for theater admission in the United States in 1938 was 23 cents. And a heavy percentage of those seeing Snow White were children admitted for a dime. Walt was euphoric. To see Disney's folly turn out so magnificently well was dreamlike. Welcome back. Welcome back. Yes, that's your tail. That's your tail. And now I'm going to have to brush all this plant crud off my Dalmatians. Thank you. The experience erased all the bitter happenings of his early career, the bankruptcy of Laugh-O-Grams, the loss of Oswald, the defections of animators he had brought into the business, the chicanery of Pat Powers. You know what? I think I am just going to make it a drinking game. Whenever I think of what I want to say about those fellas, I'll just take a drink. Make it a double. He was enormously proud of his artists. They had worked long hours at salaries. Apparently I'm combining words again. They had worked long hours at salaries that were modest compared to similar work in other industries, although higher than those paid in other cartoon studios. Some of the Disney animators were so eager for Snow White to succeed that they tacked up advertising posters on fences and telephone poles when the movie opened in Los Angeles. The Disneys had instituted a... You've got to be kidding me. The Disneys had instituted a system of bonus payments to employees when the studio fortunes were prospering, and with the Snow White success, surprise amounts appeared in paychecks. Walt also wanted a dramatic way to show his appreciation for his workers' efforts, and he announced a festive weekend for the entire studio staff at the Lake Norconian Resort east of Los Angeles. It was a mistake. The latent bohemianism of the Disney artists sprang forth full-blown. Legends of the riotous happenings were repeated for years. The event was not. You know, in my own personal history, I would like to recount to my sworn brother James and his former roommate Mike the tale of the infamous pizza and beer party of October 2012. See also the infamous zombie apocalypse party, also of 2012. I think I should drink to that. Good times. Good times. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs indicated the direction in which the Disney organization had to go. Short cartoons would continue to be the staple product, providing a steady income and permitting Walt to train new animators and develop fresh techniques. But the shorts were sold to theaters in blocks, and even the exceptionally good ones earned very little more than average cartoons. Walt sometimes mused over how much more money Three Little Pigs might have amassed if it had been feature-length. I really don't want to think about the Three Little Pigs being made feature-length, so hey, Bob Chapek, if you happen to be watching this, don't do that. Features had to become the creative thrust of the studio. Walt realized that the company could expand only by producing full-length movies to compete for theater rentals with the top-flight attractions of the major studios. He began devoting his major attention to features, paying less heed to the shorts. Thus began the pattern of his creative life. As he discovered each new, unexplored medium, his interest dwindled in the one that he had previously conquered. Everyone's in the NBA now, apparently. Again, Walt pressed for expansion. He hired more and more artists, looking ahead to the time when the studio would be producing several cartoon features simultaneously. Obviously, the Hyperion Avenue plant could no longer accommodate his ambitious program. It had grown chaotically, spilling to adjoining lots and across the street. In 1937 and early 1938, the studio had added a feature building, 3 film vaults, part of a soundstage, test camera bungalow, camera building, projection booth, electric shop, sound shop, paint lab, and inking building, as well as several nearby bungalows, which were used for various purposes. Ew, he's drooling again. Air conditioning was non-existent, and work on cells had to be suspended during the summer's hottest days because the artists' sweat dripped on the ink and paint. As a Georgia resident, the mental image of that is horrific, disgusting, and terrifying, but all too real. Walt and Roy agreed that they needed to build a new studio. Oh, you're being sweet. They found 51 acres for sale on Buena Vista Street in Burbank, just over the hills of Griffith Park. Are you not going to let me read? On August 31st, 1938, they put a deposit of $10,000 on the property, the purchase price to be $100,000. Walt and Lily now had a second daughter, Sharon May, born on New Year's Eve, 1936. Oh gosh, am I going to start crying already? We're not even 10 minutes in. The Disneys did some entertaining at home, mostly for relatives and close friends at the studio. Walt and Lily went to the studio at night to play badminton with other husbands and wives. Although Walt was now accepted as one of Hollywood's most successful and creative filmmakers, he rarely mingled with Hollywood society. He went each year to the Academy Awards banquet and usually came home with an Oscar. For Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, he received a special one, consisting of one full-size and 7 dwarf Oscars mounted in a stair-step arrangement. Such appearances before his peers caused an uncommon lack of ease. The 10-year-old Shirley Temple, noticing his demeanor when she presented him the Snow White Oscars, commented, "Don't be nervous, Mr. Disney." Cat hair. The Oscars brought new fame to Walt Disney, and he found himself being recognized whenever he appeared in public. He was not entirely pleased. I never have time to ponder over the fact that I may be what they call a celebrity. Oh, come here. Jewel, sit, baby. You. Yes, you. He wrote in response to an inquiry from Arnold Herman of Elmhurst College, Illinois. And if I am one, it has never helped me make a better picture, nor has it ever bettered my polo game, which I certainly wish it would. Here's once when it happened, though. It did get me a good seat to one of the football games last winter. But then, what about the mob that pounced on me for autographs after the game? No, being a celebrity doesn't mean so much. He's got a wad of his own hair stuck in his mouth because I was petting him too much. Walt had to give up polo. Roy had urged him to do so, arguing that the man on whom their enterprise relied for its creative direction should not risk his health in such a dangerous sport. Walt resisted until he played in 2 matches in which horsemen suffered fatal injuries. Then he himself was involved in an accident and crushed 4 of his cervical vertebrae. Why do men always gotta learn the hard way? The injury might have healed if he had been placed in a cast. Sorry, my words are stumbling over each other. But he consulted a chiropractor who manipulated the broken bones and contributed to an arthritic condition that pained Walt Disney until the end of his life. Both Walt and Roy became increasingly concerned about their parents, who were living in Portland and, despite the advance of their years, were working as hard on the small apartment houses they owned as they had on the Marceline farm. When Flora Disney's health broke down, Roy flew to Portland to convince his parents that they could no longer exert themselves. Walt wrote his mother, ... "We have been worried for some time for fear you and Dad have been attempting too much and jeopardizing your health." I was glad that Roy was able to sit down and talk things over with you and reason things out. I think you should keep in mind that your health is worth far more than any money that might be derived by trying to do too much with your own hands. After all, money is no good for us if we do not have good health to enjoy it. I would a lot rather be poor and healthy than rich and have ill health. And keep in mind, this is, while yes, it is coming from a place of privilege, it is also coming from a place of experience. Walt knew what it was like to be poor and in good health, and now that he had money, polo injury. Anyway, I want you to know that we have been praying and hoping that everything would turn out for the best, and it is a big relief to us to know that you are getting along so well. ... I hope Dad will listen to reason and stop doing the heavy work that he has been doing. It might lead to complications with his rupture. I can't understand why he won't take things easier and behave himself. It may be that the trouble you had will be a warning to him. All right, this may or may not surprise you to know, but I myself can be very stubborn. And hearing Walt saying, I can't understand why he won't take things easier and behave himself. Well, gee, I just can't imagine that either. Either. You say either, I say either. Let's call the whole thing off. The elder Disneys continued to live in Portland until 1938, when Roy and Walt convinced their parents that the Southern California climate would be better for them. The sons paid $8,300 for a comfortable bungalow in North Hollywood, a short distance from the house of Roy and Edna, and their son, Roy Edward. All those R's and W's have me a little flummoxed, I'm sorry. Who was then 8 years old. New Year's Day of 1938 was a joyous celebration for the whole Disney family. It was the golden wedding anniversary of Flora and Elias. All of their sons gathered for the event. Herb now lived in Los Angeles with his wife and daughter. He still worked for the post office. Ray had moved west from Kansas City and was running an insurance business. Ruth remained in Portland, where she had married Theodore Beecher and had a son. At the anniversary celebration, Walt recorded a mock interview with his parents, and it demonstrates the raillery within the family. Walt, well, you folks are almost ready to celebrate your 50th wedding anniversary. Flora, we're not gonna celebrate. Walt, why not? Flora, oh, what's the use? Walt, well, Dad likes to celebrate. He's always enjoyed a good time. Flora, we've been celebrating for 50 years. Getting tired of it. Oh my goodness. Walt, what about you, Dad? Don't you want to make whoopee on your golden anniversary? My goodness. Elias, oh, we don't want to go to any extremes at all. Walt, well, I hoped you wouldn't go to any extremes if you're whoopieing it up. Flora, he don't know how to make whoopee. Walt, Mother, how was it to live with a guy for 50 years? That's an awful long time. Flora, well, it was a long time, but, Walt, I think he was kind of ornery at times, wasn't he, huh? Flora, sure he was ornery. You know a little bit about that yourself, don't you? Do you remember the time you painted the whole side of the house when we went to town? Walt, me? Flora and Elias? Yes, you. Walt, oh, that was Roy or somebody. I wouldn't do a thing like that. Flora, no, it was you. Walt, well, it must have been Roy, 'cause I couldn't think of myself doing a thing like that. I can only wonder what little Ruth had to say about the business. Oh my goodness. Home movies of the Disney family were taken during the 1930s, and they afford a revealing portrait of the elder Disneys in their late years. Flora Disney appears better looking than in still photographs, which accent the deep, hollow eyes. She has a twinkle in the movies, especially when she is teased by Walt. Elias seems different too, not the somber person of the photographs. Posing for the cameraman on a lawn swing, he tries to force a kiss on Flora, but she objects and places a pillow between them. He seems unmarked by his lifetime of disappointments. Indeed, he retained his socialist idealism to the end of his life. Walt, who had once supported Franklin Roosevelt but was growing more conservative, once asked, Dad, how do you feel about having voted 50 years for candidates who never won anything? Walter, I feel fine, Elias replied. We have won. We've won a lot. I've found out that things don't always come about in the form you have advocated. but you keep fighting, and they come about in some way or another. Today, everything I fought for in those early days has been absorbed into the platforms of both the major parties. Now I feel pretty good about that. I think we could all do well to remember those words, whatever side of the aisle, if any, you happen to fall upon. I think Elias Disney really had it right there. Oh dear. Elias Disney was in his 70s when he discovered that he had been voting illegally all his life. His voting status was challenged, and it was discovered that he was an alien in the eyes of the law. When the family had moved from Canada to Kansas, his father had taken out naturalization papers. When he achieved his citizenship, his minor children had become citizens too. But Elias had come of age before the process had been completed, and he remained a Canadian citizen. Although born in Ohio, Flora Disney was also an alien because of marriage. I raised my family here. This country has been good to me, Elias announced. I'm going to die an American citizen. And so he and Flora spent long hours restudying the Constitution and American history for their citizenship examinations. When they appeared in court, the judge remarked, "Mr. Disney, you won't have to go through this," and Elias and Flora were declared naturalized. The elder Disneys had been in their new home less than a month when tragedy struck. A defective furnace caused Flora's death by asphyxiation on the night of November 26, 1938. Walt and Roy were devastated, blaming themselves because their mother's death had happened in the house they had bought. Walt was sensitive about the tragedy until the end of his life. 20 years later, one of his secretaries casually mentioned his mother's death. "I don't want that ever brought up in this office again," Walt said sternly, and he hurried out of the room. I've long heard it speculated that Flora Disney's sudden passing was the reason for so many Disney mothers, especially early on, being either deceased before the film started or passing away in the course of the film. Notably, of course, is Bambi's mother. But now I don't have a source for this handy. This is just something that I heard through the grapevine, perhaps at Walt Disney World when I was there with my brother. But apparently, Mrs. Jumbo was not intended to make it through the film, Dumbo, but Lily Disney put her foot down on that particular creative decision, saying to Walt that the film would just be too depressing otherwise. Considering the baby mine sequence, I'm inclined to agree. The cry of distributors and exhibitors after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the same that greeted the hit of Three Little Pigs. More pigs! Now the movie men implored, "Give us more dwarfs." Walt Disney refused to repeat himself. He embarked on 3 new animated features that were totally different in content and style. Pinocchio came first. The Picaresque Tale, written by Carlo Lorenzini. The Picaresque Tale, written by Carlo Lorenzini under the pen name of Carlo Collodi in 1880, seemed like an ideal subject for a feature cartoon, and Walt pursued the new project almost demonically. He was determined to make it even greater than Snow White. During a story meeting on March 15, 1938, he was exploding with ideas for the sequence in which Pinocchio was swallowed by the whale. Incidentally, there are several Disney villains that I can't really count as villains. Monstro is the first of those. He's just hungry, and then, excuse me, if you've ever had a tickle in the back of your throat, imagine some schmuck building a fire in there. I can truly understand why he's just a touch upset. Pinocchio should use every ounce of force he has in his swimming to escape the whale. This should be built to terrific suspense. It should be equivalent to the storm and the chase of the queen in Snow White. The old man, Geppetto, already swallowed by the whale, should get excited when the whale starts after the fish. When the fish start coming in, he could look toward the whale's mouth and say, "Tuna." Pinocchio could be swimming with the fish and the whale swallows them all. See, he's just hungry. As the old man is fishing inside the whale, he pulls out one fish after another and finally pulls out Pinocchio without realizing it. The cat, I love Figaro. The cat sees Pinocchio, gets excited, and meows at the old man, but the old man goes right on fishing. Finally, Pinocchio calls, "Father!" The old man realizes who it is and shouts, "Pinocchio, my son!" We can get comedy out of the whale sneezing with Pinocchio and Geppetto inside. They should react in a certain way. It would be equivalent to the hiccups in the giant's mouth. The whale would quiver before the sneeze and shake them around, throwing them off their feet onto the floor. They would be shouting over the noise of the whale. When he sneezed, it would slosh the water all around and up on the sides, and it would drop down on Geppetto and Pinocchio like a shower. Oh my God, I forgot how disgusting that sequence is. The sneeze stirs up the water, so when they escape, the water is already rough and stormy. They get ready, and the sneeze blows them out. Then, as the whale comes into another sneeze and the inhale starts drawing them back, they have to paddle against it. The underwater stuff is a swell place for the multiplane, diffusing and putting haze in between, with shafts of light coming down. I would like to see a lot of multiplane in this. Ugh, there is cat hair in my drink. Yuck. Because of what Walt and his staff had learned on Snow White, they should have had an easier time with Pinocchio. But they didn't. What are you trying to do? The story had splendid elements of adventure, but Pinocchio lacked the appealing characters of Snow White. Pinocchio himself was a nettling problem. He was a puppet come to life, and he could not be as animated as a normal boy would be. His moves had to be simple and unsophisticated, as though he had known no previous history. His face was expressionless, and he lacked the boyish qualities that could make such a character engaging. After 6 months, Walt called a halt in production. He realized that new elements had to be added before Pinocchio could come to life. The answer was to surround Pinocchio with intriguing, flamboyant characters. The most important was Jiminy Cricket. In the book, the cricket had played a brief role as admonisher of the errant puppet, only to be rewarded by being crushed under Pinocchio's foot. For the film, the cricket was installed as the boy's conscience, trying to guide him away from his evil companions and the pitfalls of pleasure-seeking. But how could an ugly insect be converted into a likable character? And how could he be large enough to play in scenes with human figures? Several artists attempted concepts of the cricket, complete with antennae. Walt rejected them all. He sent for one of the younger animators, Ward Kimball. When Kimball entered the boss's office, he had every intention of resigning. His work for Snow White had been had been on the bed building and soup eating scenes, and both had been cut from the final version. I don't know what Stitch is on about. Kimball tried to express his despair, but Walt started one of his spellbinding narratives, describing the adventures of Pinocchio and his voice of conscience, Jiminy Cricket. By the end of the recital, Kimball had forgotten his resolve to quit. He accepted Walt's assignment to produce a workable cricket, and Kimball's Jiminy was appealing and uncricket-like. The problem of size was resolved by skillful use of camera angles. Jiminy Cricket's success was assured with the addition of 2 hit songs for him to sing, When You Wish Upon a Star and Give a Little Whistle. They were composed by Lee Harleen, with lyrics by Ned Washington and sung by Cliff Edwards. Cliff Edwards was a performing artist in his own right at that point in time, and if you ever have an opportunity to look up his song Good Little Bad Little You, or his cover of Singin' in the Rain, you'll discover he was known by the performing name Ukulele Ike. He's really got a marvelous quality, so go look him up. He came up on my Spotify unexpectedly. The stick-like figure of Pinocchio became more rounded and boy-like, and he was presented as a boy who was easily swayed by bad influences rather than a determined delinquent. The interplay between him and Jiminy worked perfectly, although no one ever solved the fundamental problem of a hero with no will of his own. Pinocchio was literally a puppet who was alternately drawn between good and evil, hence he could never match the human appeal of Snow White. With Pinocchio at last on the right track, Walt ordered the film into full production, and his staff shared Walt's resolve to make the second film greater than the first. If anything, there was an overabundance of zeal, with the directorial units competing to make their sequences the most important and effective in the movie. Walt had to maintain control, lest Pinocchio end up 3 times its desired length. He indulged his artists in the use of special effects and the multiplane camera for visual images that far exceeded those of Snow White. The results were highly effective artistically and expensive. When Pinocchio was finally completed, it had cost a stunning $2,600,000, and I'd like to share you a little story right now. In the neighborhood of 13 years ago, I was at an anime convention in Atlanta, and I found me a brother. His name's Jareth Valentine, and he is the most wonderful family member anyone could ever ask for. With my also chosen sister Katie having moved from Macon to Florida to Washington, D.C. on her life's journey, Jareth found himself unilaterally appointed my conscience. And a couple of years ago at Walt Disney World, we found him the official conscience Disney pin, just like Jiminy Cricket has in the movie. Sorry. Fantasia came into being because of Walt Disney's concern for the career of Mickey Mouse. Walt retained his almost mystical attachment to Mickey. To him, the mouse was not merely a revenue-producing cartoon character, nor even a good luck talisman. Walt was Mickey's voice, his alter ego, and it troubled Walt to see the Mickey Mouse career decline. It had been inevitable. Mickey had been an international attraction for a decade, and few movie stars could sustain their careers for that long a time. In the beginning, Mickey Mouse could do anything. He was drawn with a series of circles of varying sizes, and he moved with what animators called the rubber hose technique, action with little relation to human or animal movement. As cartoons became more sophisticated, so did Mickey. Freddie Moore was the first to apply the squash and stretch technique to the animation of Mickey, making him more human and appealing. Moore gave the face more character and definition. For the first time, Mickey had a cheek when his teeth went together. Even with a more pliable face and figure, Mickey presented problems. He was cuter, but he lacked the primitive vitality of the early cartoons. With his shy manner, he was essentially a latent character, not the instigator of comic happenings. That function befell the broader characters who supported Mickey in the cartoons. Inevitably, they became stars of their own series. Donald Duck and Pluto in 1937, Goofy in 1939. The sizes of all three made them easy to work with. Donald was the height of a duck, and Pluto and Goofy could be portrayed dog size. But the Mickey storymen and animators were faced with the recurrent problem: what can you do with a 4-foot mouse? In 1938, Walt decided to star Mickey Mouse in a cartoon presentation of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, an old fairy tale which had been interpreted by a poem by, I've never known how to pronounce this, Goethe, Goethe, and a concert piece written by the French composer Paul Dukas. Mickey was cast as the apprentice, whose misuse of the sorcerer's powers wreaks disaster. The entire action would be done in pantomime to the Dukas music. Walt seemed pleased that no dialogue would be required. He suspected that Mickey's, Walt's, hesitant falsetto contributed to the character's difficulty in playing varied roles. Walt planned to release The Sorcerer's Apprentice as a two-reeler, but that changed after a chance meeting with Leopold Stokowski, the distinguished conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra. During a conversation at a party, Walt mentioned that he was starring Mickey Mouse in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Stokowski, a devoted follower of the Disney cartoons, volunteered to conduct the Dukas music for Walt. Stokowski visited the studio and was overwhelmed by everything he saw. He was especially fascinated with the recording of sound and the ability of technicians to alter and combine various tracks of music. When Stokowski began the score, he recorded each section at a time: woodwinds, brass, percussion, etc. He spent hours at the mixing board, combining the sections in varying degrees of volume. "This is the ultimate in conducting," he said delightedly. Stokowski suggested other musical works which could be interpreted in animation. Walt listened to the recordings and his imagination soared. He announced The Sorcerer's Apprentice would not be released as a two-reeler, but would be part of a full-length film that would feature other works of serious music as well. The new project was given the working title of The Concert Feature. One of Stokowski's suggestions was the Toccata and Fugue in D minor by Bach. Walt did some reading about Bach and discovered that the composer had been a church organist who had often improvised his works in flights of creativity. Why not illustrate the Toccata and Fugue, he suggested, in the same free manner? He tested his theory by listening to the Bach composition again and again, and he and Stokowski discussed their reactions. A loud crescendo seemed to Walt like coming out of a dark tunnel and a big splash of light was coming in on you. A passage suggested orange to Walt. "Oh no, I see it as purple," said Stokowski. A woodwind portion gave Walt the image of a hot kettle with spaghetti floating in it. Walt was amused later when highbrow critics professed to see profundities in the abstractions created for the Toccata and Fugue. He wasn't aiming at anything highbrow, nor was he trying to bring classical music to the mass audience. He was simply trying to use serious music as another tool for animation. Always he stressed the visual. I remember when I used to go to a concert when I was a kid, he told his artists, I can still see the orchestra tuning up and the conductor coming out and starting the music and the violin bows going up and down in unison. It had been a visual experience for him, the images of the players on the stage and the mental pictures that the music had inspired. In most cases, the music for the concert feature was selected first and the visual image applied after. For one sequence, it was the reverse. Walt wanted to depict the creation and evolution of Earth, and he instructed Dick Huemer? 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 I'm not sure. To find a suitable piece of music. Huemer had been assigned to the concert feature because of his taste for classical music. Walt often introduced him, "Meet Dick Huemer, he goes to operas." You know, I have a friend who goes by the name of Ivan, who for some reason introduces me to people as his favorite opera singer. Huemer could only locate a second-class work called Creation, and Walt explained his problem to Stokowski. "Why don't we do the Sacre?" the conductor exclaimed. "Sacre? What's that?" Walt asked. "Sacre du printemps." I can't do French. "Rite of Spring by Stravinsky," said Stokowski. He told how Stravinsky had depicted the primitive people of the Russian steppes with weird dissonances. The music could easily portray the Earth's paroxysms during its birth and early history, Stokowski declared. Walt listened to a recording of the composition, and he immediately agreed. You know, something else snuck into the concert feature, probably around that point in time. There was a woman by the name of Marjorie Courtenay Latimer, and she just chanced by in a South African fish market the corpse of a fish that people thought died with the dinosaurs. It was called a coelacanth. And if you pay really, really close attention in the Rite of Spring sequence, you can see a jawless fish evolve into something a bit bigger, and then what is unmistakably a coelacanth as it dodges a Dunkleosteus and then grows feet and crawls out of the sea to become Ariops, the first amphibian. Coelacanths still live with us to this day, and I am so steamed that we don't have some coelacanth buddies to go visit at the living seas, for real. Walt hired Deems Taylor, the noted music commentator, to advise on the concert feature and later to perform the narration. Like Stokowski, Taylor was enchanted by the inner workings of the Disney studio. One day, when Walt complained that sometimes he believed his artists had never grown up, Taylor replied, "How can you grow up in this atmosphere, for God's sake? It's like living in Santa Claus's workshop." I really wish Deems Taylor had lived to see Elf happen, like the Will Ferrell movie. Taylor and Stokowski joined Walt and his story personnel in conferences about the selection and treatment of the music. On September 30th, 1938, they were discussing the Arcadian sequence to accompany Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony in the film. Stokowski: "In listening to this music, it seems to come forth in three large masses. The first is the fawn school, and so forth. The second is the little feminine one. The third is very excited, where something is all jumbled up together. That's the general plan of the music, if you keep it in three big masses." Walt: "There's a theme that comes in with the dancing, the flute, then the dancing lesson, then the beauty, or love, or water and swimming, and then comes what I would call the chase excitement. It really is four." Stokowski: "I think beauty, love, excitement is part of the chase. It's in the music and part of the chase. So it's the flute playing, the fawns dancing with or around the girls, and the excitement." Walt: "There would be a lot of comedy in that chase if you had a group of little fawns. It would be better than only one because he would be awfully busy. You could have an awful lot to show. You could show 2 or 3 little guys try to bulldog him and everything. You can accomplish more with half a dozen. Taylor, if Oscar sneaked up on the sleeping Pegasus on the ground and it went up in the air with him on his back, well, yes, he might sneak up on what he thinks is the rear end of a horse, lasso it, and it flies up. And here's Oscar hanging on to it, and it dumps him in a pool. The whole last end of 4 minutes can be full of life. If we get stuck, we can ignore the part that is supposed to be love. The flying horse comes down, maybe to help the girls, and it flies down like a hummingbird. It can fly around and kick in the air while still flying. Taylor, show Oscar terrified, going up and up and up, and he sees what's down below, something that is a reproduction of Greece in the history books. Walt felt dissatisfied that the playback of recordings could not duplicate the full, rich, orchestral sound he heard in the recording studio. He assigned his sound department to develop a new system of multi-aural sounds which could reproduce the actual performance in a concert hall and then some. For Schubert's Ave Maria, he wanted the voices of the choristers to sound as if they were in procession down the aisle of the theater. You know, when I was growing up, my dad was raised Catholic, and he remained pretty staunchly Catholic throughout his life. Schubert's Ave Maria always made him cry due to his powerful associations with the peace and his family Christmases when he was a boy. So when I would watch Fantasia, Daddy would cut the videotape off before Ave Maria came on at the tail end of Night on Bald Mountain. 5 years ago, my brother Jareth took me to see the 75th anniversary theatrical re-release of Fantasia at Tinseltown Theater in Jacksonville. And myself, my brother's girlfriend Skitty, and our mutual friend Raven, we were all sitting in Tinseltown, and everyone's sort of bracing because I can be a crier. And all of a sudden, I am raging mad because Ave Maria is in bloody English. Spoiler alert, if you've never seen the end of Fantasia, Ave Maria was recorded in English. Not in German, not in liturgical Latin, English. And my goodness gracious, but I went off in that theater like a Roman candle. Excuse me. The result of the research was Fantasound, which recorded music with several microphones and reproduced it on an equal number of loudspeakers, creating a stereophonic effect. To get the best possible quality, Walt had Stokowski record the entire score at the Philadelphia Academy of Music, which was noted for its superb acoustics. The bill alone for Fantasia amounted to more than $400,000, and when the long production ended, the total cost was $2,280,000. The third project Walt Disney chose to follow Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was Bambi. Don't get me started. Although it was started at the same time as the other two, it was the last to be released. The Felix Salten book of a deer's coming of age in the forest provided a natural vehicle for a cartoon feature. Only through animation could the story be adequately told, but Bambi was different from anything Disney had ever attempted. It was far more serious than Snow White and Pinocchio, and the characters were all animals. Walt realized that to carry such a storyline, his animators would need to create characters that were realistic. The deer would have to be deer-like, the rabbits rabbit-like. Could his artists meet such a challenge and still create a film that would be entertaining? He determined to give them all the tools they needed. He hired a noted painter of animals, Rico Lebrun, to lecture on the structure of animals and how they moved. He sent a cameraman, Maurice Day, to Maine to photograph thousands of feet of forests, snowfall, rainstorms, spider webs, changes of light and seasons. The Maine Development Commission provided 2 live fawns for the Disney studio, and they were sketched and photographed as they grew. Rabbits, ducks, skunks, owls, and other species were added until the studio resembled a small zoo. A local naturalist contributed hundreds of photographs of animals in action. Let's see, I think I might have here, doo-dee-doo. Here we are. Disney art class studies a deer for Bambi. I don't know how clearly you can see that, but there it is. There she is, excuse me. Yep, that's a she. That's a she. During one of the first story conferences on Bambi, Walt outlined some of his ideas for the production. Block quote. When it comes to the animation, we can do a lot with the rabbit. He has a certain mannerism that can be drawn. We might get him to twitch his nose. Let's see if I can still do this. Dang it, doesn't register on camera. I don't like to have us get off the track too much to show his life. Everything should be done through Bambi. The owl ought to be a stupid, silly thing. He is always trying to scare people. Remember what happened back in Marceline? I like his crazy screech as it is described in the book. You're welcome. I'm not going to reproduce a screech owl sound for you here today. He might be a sort of Hugh Herbert, an eccentric movie comic type. I would hate to see any of the characters too straight. You would want that in Bambi's mother. You would want Bambi more or less straight, in a way. The comedy would come from him as a kid through his questions and his curiosity. The rest of the characters, I would like to say, come out of life. I would like the old stag to say what he has to say in a direct way and in such a voice that Bambi is unable to answer him. What he says will be sort of final. That can be put over through the voice. I like Feline's character in the book. She is clever and she understands things. Bambi asks a lot of questions which she can answer. If we build her that way, we will be able to get a lot of stuff over when she and Bambi get together. Let us start moving on the thing and not drag it out too long. After we get our characters set, we should write all our business for the characters and build the first half. Then we should record it and get our sketches. We will shoot the sketches and make a music track of all which will make our story pretty tight. Our soundtrack will be a dummy track composed of a cello, a violin, a piano, and an organ, which will be enough to give us an idea of the music. When we do that, we will have a chance to preview the thing before we go in to lay out an animation. That would include the first part of the picture up to the end of the first winter. Walt tried to push ahead in a deliberate way, but Bambi simply would not be managed. Once again, he and his artists were pioneering. Even such a matter as the spots on the fawn's skin provided complication. The best of animators had to spend 45 minutes on each drawing. Daily output would be 8 drawings. Half a foot of film, compared to a normal rate of 10 feet per day. Less experienced animators required an hour and a half to draw the fawn. The storyline continued to present problems, and Walt realized that he could not maintain the same production pace as with Pinocchio and Fantasia. He formed a small unit of young animators, Frank Thomas, Milt Kahl, Eric Larson, and Ollie Johnston, to concentrate on Bambi. Social distancing wasn't supposed to mean scream over 3 lawns, now was it? Don't show me anything until you're satisfied with it, Walt instructed. Thomas went to work on the scene in which a butterfly lands on the tail of young Bambi. Kahl drew a sequence of the fawn leaping over a log and falling in a tangle on top of Thumper. When the rough animation on both scenes was completed, Walt saw the result in a sweatbox. Tears filled his eyes. Oh gosh, not again. Fellas, this is pure gold, he remarked to Thomas and Kahl. He had at last seen what he wanted Bambi to be. With 3 features and the regular program of shorts in production, the Hyperion studio was filled to overflowing. The Bambi unit moved to a rented building at 861 North Seward Street in Hollywood. The story research, promotion, engineering, comic strip, and training departments occupied the 2nd floor of a building at 1717 North Vine Street. Walt was anxiously looking forward to the time when he could have all of the studio departments at the new headquarters in Burbank. Planning the new studio was a fresh and immensely stimulating experience for Walt. For a dozen years he had endured the chaotically makeshift studio on Hyperion Avenue, where animators worked in cluttered, poorly lighted rooms through the chill of winter and the summer's heat. He was determined to build a new studio where he and his fellow workers could create in an atmosphere of comfort and congeniality. Walt involved himself with every aspect of planning, conferring with architects, draftsmen, furniture designers, interior decorators, landscapers, acoustic experts, carpenters, and plumbers. One day, Otto Englander burst into Walt's... Something bit me. One day, Otto Englander burst into Walt's office with an idea for ending the first movement of the Pastoral Symphony in Fantasia. Pardon me. Englander found Walt seated on the floor of his office amid a clutter of chromium tubes and blue leatherette cushions. Walt explained sheepishly that he was considering a new design for an animator's chair, and he was taking it apart to see how it was constructed. Walt listened as Englander explained his idea, having 2 cupids draw a curtain before the audience. ... Approved it and returned his dissection of the chair. The new studio, Walt insisted, would need to be big enough to accommodate his maximum production. That meant the regular program of 18 to 20 short cartoons plus the features. If he released 1 feature a year, he would need facilities for 3 features, since they seemed to require 3 years to produce. If he increased his output to 2 a year, then 6 features would be in production at one time. The center of the production process would be the animation building, where the various phases of animation could flow smoothly from one to the other in a movie-making assembly line. It would house the story department, directors, layout men, animators, assistant animators, and in-betweeners. Oh, I beg your pardon. When the animation had been completed, the work would move through an underground tunnel to the inking and painting building, then to the camera building, and beyond to the cutting building. The 3 stages would be built, 1 for recording music, the other 2 for dialogue and sound effects. There would also be a theater, a process laboratory for experimenting with film methods, and a restaurant. A key element in the planning was air conditioning. At the Hyperion Avenue studio, Walt had often grumbled because dust on the cells and lenses interfered with production. Variation in humidity was also a problem, since the water paints cracked and chipped off the celluloid in dry weather and smeared when it was humid. Walt also realized that the summer weather was much hotter in the San Fernando Valley, and he wanted his employees to work in comfort the year round. Walt invited engineers of General Electric to confer with architects and structural engineers during the planning stages, rather than try to install air conditioning after the buildings had been erected. A system was devised to pipe fresh, cool air to every office. I tell you, if these guys are the reason we have the air conditioning we have today, there's a sainthood in it for them somewhere. But what if someone opens a window? That'll destroy the whole system, Walt reasoned. The solution? Remove the window cranks. I can just hear, we're not trying to air condition all of Burbank, are we? The extent of the planning presaged Disneyland and Walt Disney World. Water for the air conditioning system, as well as the process laboratory, lawn sprinkling, commodes, and other uses, came from 2 wells sunk 300 feet into the earth. Not only were the major buildings connected by tunnels, the utilities were placed underground as well. The studio would become a miniature city with its own streets, storm drains, sewage system, fire hydrants, telephone exchange, and electric distribution system. The sizes of the streets, conduits, and pipes were all calculated to provide for future expansion without interfering with studio production. Walt lavished his most concentrated planning on the animation building. It was designed as a 3-story structure with 8 wings connected to a central corridor. The wings would be on a true east-west axis, each office with an outside view. The plan provided a maximum of rooms with north light. Those facing the sun would be shielded with Venetian blinds that could be adjusted to lessen the glare. Because Burbank was close to earth faults, the building would be constructed in 10 separate units which would move independently in case of earthquake. And now I have a quake from Animaniacs stuck in my head thoroughly. Everything was designed for the comfort of the Disney animators. Each piece of furniture was planned to combine function with graceful modern appearance. The animation desk was redesigned to eliminate waste, time, and motion, and carpets and drapes, in harmonizing pastel colors, would provide a restful, quiet atmosphere. The sweatbox would be abolished, although the cognomen remained. Animators would be able to review their work in comfortable projection rooms. Walt aimed to make the Burbank studio a worker's paradise. The buildings would be surrounded by broad lawns where the employees could play baseball, badminton, and volleyball during their lunch hours. Who wants to play baseball at lunch, for Pete's sake? That just sounds like a great way to get sick. Yeah. Sweet cheese, my Mimi's talking from up in heaven. They would be able to eat in a modern restaurant where the appetizing meals would be served at prices below the studio's cost. If an animator felt the need for a malted milk or a cup of coffee during the day, they would need only to call the snack shop on the first floor and it would be delivered to them. Wouldn't that be nice? The penthouse of the animation building would be the equivalent of a gentleman's club, and I really mean that, gentlemen, where the animators and executives could make use of a lounge, soda fountain, sun deck, gymnasium, and showers. Except for after-work parties, no liquor was served. Walt himself never drank until after the workday was over, and he disapproved of those who took long lunch breaks at nearby bars. One of my biggest pet peeves in the history of ever is people who use Epcot as a place to get sloshed. For Pete's sakes, behave yourselves. You are not at Dragon Con. Yes, please, feel free. Drink around the world. I'm having myself a drink right now. But know your limits and behave appropriately. Have yourself a designated driver. Never get behind the wheel of a car if you've had too much to drink. And for the love of mud, remember that there are children present. I certainly don't expect you to maintain all of the standards Walt set, but conduct yourself as an adult if you are going to drink adult beverages. And once those parks open back up, if I see your butt being inappropriate at Epcot or Hollywood Studios or Animal Kingdom or anywhere else they serve liquor, I will say something. I will be polite, but I will say something. Walt and Roy asked their father to supervise the carpentry in the building of the new studio, hoping the work would help alleviate the despondency he had felt since Flora's death. Although he was 80, Elias Disney donned work clothes and spent a full day overseeing the carpenters and pounding nails himself. As he watched the construction grow, he expressed his concern for his youngest son. "Walter, how on earth are you going to support this big place with those cartoons of yours? Aren't you afraid you'll go broke?" Walt replied, "Well, if I do fail, Dad, I can get out easy. You notice how this place is built with rooms along long corridors? If I go broke with my cartoons, I can always sell it for a hospital." Elias Disney was greatly relieved by the explanation. Once again, I would love to say a huge, huge, huge thank you to our healthcare and relief workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. You have my love, you have my support, and I'm sure Walt and Elias are both smiling at you from on high. Walt followed each phase of the planning and drove to the Burbank property almost every day during the excavation and construction. With his studio operation now scattered from Hyperion to Hollywood, he was anxious to have the new studio completed. The camera building was finished first, and filming began there on Pinocchio in August of 1939. When the lease on the Seward property ran out in the fall, the Bambi unit occupied part of the uncompleted animation building. On the day after Christmas, the major part of the studio began the move from Hyperion to Burbank, a few of the departments following in the spring. For his own office, Walt chose a suite on the 3rd floor in the far northeast corner of the animation building. The suite contained an outer office, an office for his secretary, Dolores Vogt, V-O-G-H-T, Walt's own spacious office, a conference room, and a room where he could sleep if he had to remain overnight at the studio. Such an occasion arose a month after he had moved into the new studio. He later related his experience. "I was all set to go to sleep about 10:30 when all of a sudden the air conditioning shut off for the night. Woo! It was like submerging in a submarine. There was plenty of air in the room, but I had this feeling that I was suffocating. I yelled, but there was nobody around. I ran over to the window and clawed and scratched, trying to get it open. All I did was cut up my fingers." Me, the guy who had told him to take all the handles off the window. Finally, I had to break the window so I could breathe. And, with that description of what he absolutely was having an anxiety attack, we conclude Unit 3, Chapter 12 of Walt Disney, an American Original by Bob Thomas. I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate my thanks to all of our essential workers and all our healthcare workers and everybody who's still getting their butts up and dragging themselves out with what's going on right now. We're gonna get through this, and we're gonna do it together. I'm not even sure that's a promise. I think that's a threat. Considering what I just said about drinking at Epcot, that's a threat. We're gonna get through this, and we're gonna get through it together. You don't have a choice. Anyway, I know I haven't said this in a minute, but please like, please subscribe. If you have anything you would like to hear after I finished Walt Disney An American Original, please suggest it to me. Find me on Instagram at serenity_sweet13. Find me on Twitter at serenitysweet13, no underscore. You're free to contact me on Facebook or direct message or comment right here on YouTube, okay? Luther is occupying my welcome mat right now, so I don't think he'll be joining me for my conclusion. Well, I guess all there is to say is, now it's time to say goodbye to all our company. M-I-C, see you real soon. K-E-Y. Why? Because we like you. M-O-U-S-E. Have courage and be kind. Stay strong, everybody. I'll see you at Walt Disney World when this thing is all over with.